Hi everyone, and welcome to the BedrosianWoodworks shop. Have you got a Tormek sharpening system? If you do, you probably know that this is a great machine for sharpening almost everything in your house. I use mine all the time, especially for chisels and plane irons. And as much as I like the machine, the one thing I find awkward is setting the grind angle when I'm using this SE77 jig. Let me bring the camera in closer and I'll show you more of what I mean. This plane iron was previously ground with a 30-degree bevel, and it's got a couple of small nicks in it that I'd like to grind out. So I'm going to use the SE77 jig, and when I do the grinding, I want the grind angle to match that 30-degree bevel because that's going to minimize the amount of material I need to remove from the iron, which is going to minimize the amount of time it takes me to do the sharpening so that I can get back to woodworking, which is what I really want to do. There are two ways to set the grind angle when you're using the SE77 jig. You can change the projection of the iron from the front of the jig. You can also raise or lower the support arm. And you can do both of those using the angle setting gauge until you get that 30-degree bevel. And that works fine. That's what I've been doing for quite a few years. But I wanted to come up with a faster way to get that grind angle without having to make any adjustments here at the tool. So I came up with what I call a Tormek projection jig to do just that. Here's the jig that I've designed and created, and it has different blocks that are held in place with magnets, and each of the blocks has the grind angle engraved. So I've got 40, 35, 30, 25, and 20-degree blocks. And I find the jig works best if it's mounted in a vise like this, because then I have both hands free. Using the jig is simple. I've incorporated a couple of magnets that will hold the chisel or plane iron in place. And with the 30-degree block here, I can push the plane iron down against the top surface. I can then put the jig on top. Doesn't really matter where the jig is. I don't have to use the shoulder that's built into the SE77. I can just tighten it here. And as long as the bottom, that cutting edge, is against the 30-degree block, I'm going to get a square grind. With the plane iron locked in place using that 30-degree angle block, I can come over here to the Tormek and start sharpening right away without making any further adjustments. And since the last time I sharpened this plane iron, I was using the same angle block, the projection is going to be the same, which means that this angle is going to match, and it's not going to take very long to sharpen the blade and to get back to woodworking, which is my main objective. And I was using a 30-degree block there, but if this grind angle is slightly different from 30 degrees, if it's 29 or 30 and a half, it doesn't really matter to me. As long as the grind angle is consistent each time I use that block, that's all I'm concerned about. In order for the jig to give me repeatable grind angles, I need this support bar to be at a constant height relative to the surface of the grinding wheel. Now you can see I'm using a diamond grinding wheel here, so I can set the support bar height once and the jig will continue to work for all angles, even if I switch to a different diamond wheel. It's not much different if I was using the standard wheel that comes with the Tormek. In that case, I would need to reset the height of the arm anytime I true the stone. There are several ways to determine the correct height of the support bar. The easiest is to use this TTS 100 turning tool setter, and this works for any diameter wheel, whether it's the 250 millimeter diameter diamond wheel or this smaller honing wheel with this support bar. If you don't have the TTS 100 turning tool setter, you can use a chisel or a plane iron with the projection jig, and you can set it for a particular angle, 30 degrees in this case. You can then mount the chisel or the plane iron on the support arm, and you can raise or lower the support arm until the angle setting gauge reads that same 30 degrees. At that point, you can lock this in place and you've got the correct height. Setting this height is a one-time task, so you don't need to change it unless the diameter of the grinding wheel changes. The projection jig excels with chisels and plane irons like these that have a square edge, but it works just as well with skewed plane irons like this one. The procedure is the same. The magnets hold the iron in place so that I can make sure the entire cutting edge is touching the top of this 30-degree angle block, and then I can lock the SE77 jig on top. I'm now ready to sharpen, and I'll get the same bevel angle as well as this same skew angle when I go over to the Tormek. There are a couple of other things I'll mention about the jig. The first is the angle blocks have a piece of UHMW tape on the top surface. And the reason for that is so that those blocks don't become dented as I push the chisel or the plane iron into that surface. There's also UHMW tape on the side here, so the chisel or plane iron slides freely going up or down, and it won't wear anything into the wood. The second thing is this spacer block here, which is removable. And there's a smaller one which is included, and this smaller or shorter spacer block is used with the 35 and the 40-degree angles, since those blocks are much taller. The last thing I'll mention is the material used to make the jig, which is phenolic plywood. And the reason I've done that is because the Tormek is a water-based system, so it's possible the jig could get some water on it. And if I used MDF, that could swell and would not work as well as this phenolic plywood. If you're interested in finding out more about this projection jig, either buying the plans or buying a completed jig, you can contact me at the email address that I'll include in the description below, or you can find me on Instagram at BedrosianWoodworks. Thanks for watching, everyone.